back to Does God Love Us? My name's April, in case you haven't watched any of these before. Now you know. So what we're going to talk about today is failure. I've failed. Pretty sure that most of you have failed at some point in your life doing something. But it's interesting because the biggest people in the Bible, minus Jesus, have failed. I'm going to talk about one of those people, Peter. So Peter, in Matthew 14, 22 through 33, Peter is on a boat. Now we start out where they just got done feeding 5,000 men plus women and children with some loaves of bread and fish. Huge, huge, huge miracle. They were out in a remote place and the people had only eaten whatever they had brought with them for like 3 days. Peter has just seen this big miracle done. All the disciples have. Well, Jesus is like, hey, guys, I want you to go on the sea and go to this place and I'll meet you there. Because Jesus is going to go up and pray. So Jesus goes up and prays and the disciples are on this boat. And during this time that Jesus is praying, there's waves coming up. A storm is hitting and the disciples are in this boat, pretty much in the middle of the sea. And Jesus heads out to them. Well, the disciples are getting kind of freaked out because there's the storm and the water's going crazy and they're in the middle of the sea, and all of a sudden they look out and they see this figure. And this figure is walking on the water. And they're like terrified. Which, let's think about it. You're out on a boat, right? But it's dark because there's a storm, so there's clouds. And if you were to look out and be like, what is that? I mean, at first you would think it was some kind of illusion, like your eyes just aren't seeing things correctly. What's going on? It looks like a person is walking on the water in the storm, but that can't be. I mean, that's crazy. And then they keep looking, and they're like, that's Jesus walking on the water? And they're freaking out. They're like, is it a ghost? What's going on? And Jesus hears them and says, hey, do not be troubled. Be of good cheer. Which we don't really say that much these days anymore. But he doesn't just say, quit worrying. What are you guys doing? He's like, be of good cheer. It's me. He says, do not be afraid. Pretty much, guys, it's me. Look, I'm coming to you. Be of good cheer. Don't be afraid. I mean, this is Jesus who just did this huge miracle, and the disciples were there to see it. So I guess the assumption, and this would be a correct assumption, if you've just seen something that this man did that was this huge, and then you see this man walking on the water, you may be like, wow, this is pretty amazing. But they're still disbelieving. But Peter says, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you. So Jesus says, come. So Peter, I mean, I try to put myself in his shoes. You see Jesus walking on the water. You're like afraid. And he says, don't be afraid. It's me. I'm coming to you. And then you're like, Lord, if this is really you, tell me to come to you. And he does. And now you're like, I mean, I would hope that I'd be a little excited. Like, wow, I'm going to walk on water. I've seen what this man has done. He's walking on water. It's hard to imagine what would be going through my head, except that I would be kind of excited about this. So Peter gets out, steps on the water, and takes a couple steps. And then all of a sudden, the wind comes up and everything, and he starts to look around him. Instead of at Jesus, he starts to think about where he is. I'm in the middle of the sea. I know there's a lot of people that get freaked out about swimming in the ocean because, the ocean's huge. The sea is big. Who knows what's in there? Especially back then, they didn't have radar. They didn't go down in submarines and see what was in the sea, so they don't know. So he's walking on this rolling, wavy, windy sea, and that starts to creep into his brain. Instead of, hey, I'm walking on this water and I'm going to Jesus and this is amazing. And keeping his focus there, he lets everything around him get into his head and he starts to fall. Then he begins to sink. He became afraid. He lost focus on Jesus and he started to sink. What he does is he says, Lord, save me. What I think is incredible here is that the Lord, Jesus, doesn't berate him right there. He doesn't say, you know what? You were doing fine, swim back to the boat. Or he doesn't say, I'm Jesus. I'm not going to let you drown, so get yourself back to the boat. He doesn't do that. He reaches out his hand right away, immediately, grabs a hold of Peter. Then he says to him, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? I imagine that tone was like, why? Why did you doubt? You were doing really well. You had this. You were focused and you had this and you doubted. And I was right here. And I think Jesus probably was a little sad. But I find it interesting that Jesus, he helped him immediately, reached out his hand, helped him back into the boat. But he doesn't belittle Peter. He's not like, you can't be my disciple anymore. He doesn't say that. It continues on to seeing that they're afraid. And immediately when he got into the boat, the wind died down, the storm went away. What Jesus isn't doing is he's not provoking. He's not like, see how bad this storm can get? I can fix this, but quit being afraid. Instead, he gets in the boat, the wind dies down. He's very compassionate, but he wants more for us. And I find it interesting that in the midst of Peter's failure, it's not something that Jesus takes and says, I'm done with you. Instead, he reaches out immediately and helps him. And that is where I think sometimes we get stuck. Because I think sometimes we think of ourselves as failures. We may fail at something, but when we keep trying, we're not a failure at it. We then become better and better and better at it. And Jesus didn't just drop Peter. Peter did a lot of things. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Peter pretty much went against what Jesus was saying, and Jesus had to rebuke him and say, get behind me, Satan. Peter walked on water and then started sinking because he lost faith. There's all this stuff that Peter has done, and yet Jesus keeps honing Peter's skills. He keeps reaching his hand out and pulling him up and helping him. And through all these things, Peter's faith grows and grows and grows until Jesus says, Peter, lead my church. This man who we've seen do these things, who's kind of reckless, who's kind of just speaks his mind and sometimes says dumb things, or even, like I said, rejects knowing Jesus. And God uses him and calls him the cornerstone of his church. Build my church. That should be an encouragement to us. That should be something that we look at. And it is something that when I was listening to this and reading over it, I was like, yes, I'm working on building my faith right now. And it's hard. It is hard because so many times, I don't doubt God, but I doubt where I am. And I think that's part of it, is Peter doubted where he was. He doubted, he looked around, oh no, I'm here. Instead of just keeping his eyes on Jesus. Because we're not going to be perfect. But if we're headed towards Jesus, he's going to be right there. We're going to take those steps. But it's when we get so wrapped up in really ourselves, our surroundings, what's going on. Oh no, the wind has come up. Oh, I have to do this myself. I think that right there, I have to do this myself. He took his eyes off Jesus and looked at himself, and all of a sudden he started sinking. The amazing and wonderful thing is, though, he cried out to Jesus, help me. And Jesus did immediately. And that is what he'll do for us. And I just thought this was so cool, and I wanted to share it because I think faith Faith is a layer by layer by layer by layer understanding and growth process. We grow, and then there's more. And then we grow through that. And sometimes we will fail and feel like we're taking steps backwards, but really it's just another layer being peeled off of our insecurity, of our unbelief, sometimes in God, but in our unbelief in ourselves, and that he's leading us, and that we have to trust his leading. We can fail in all these different ways, but we just have to keep peeling away these layers, and we will get stronger through those failures, and God will use them, and Jesus will always reach out his hand. That's the other thing. Jesus will always reach out his hand to us and help us back up so we can begin again onto whatever next thing it is. But what's cool is that the winds died down. It was like, okay, you went through this. All right, you're safe. The winds are died down. Let's begin on something else. So I hope this is helpful. I hope you guys got something out of this. I know that it's interesting as I read different passages and just how much comes out of these, how much I glean from them. And I've read this a lot. I've heard about Peter walking on the water. I mean, I've known about this story since I was little, but just the little things that as we grow as a Christian, the little things that we can draw out that really come into play in our lives as we grow. So, all right, guys, I will talk to you next time, and I hope you guys are having an amazing, fantastic day.